Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Sorensen, co-founder and director of optiMize, a student-led social innovation community at the University of Michigan that provides support, mentorship, and funding for students to turn ideas into impact. And this is the Why Not Me podcast, where I speak with entrepreneurs, activists, researchers, and leaders from all walks of life about how they're using their life to make a positive impact in the world. Today I spoke with Julia Dreher. Julia is a former president of optiMize, and today she works at the U.S. Agency of International Development's Center for Innovation and Impact. Julia had just come back to campus for the first time since graduating, and we talked a lot about our reflections on these past couple of years. A very interesting time to be graduating and starting a career, to say the least. We talked about how to think about meaning and purpose in the context of working on large-scale issues and campaigns where you don't always see the tangible results of your work. And sometimes you can even feel like you spent a lot of time and couldn't see the impact after all of it. Above all, we talked about optiMize. Julia told us her story of finding optiMize and how it transformed her experience at the University of Michigan and prepared her to be a leader in her work after graduation. We covered a lot of optiMize history, a lot about our programs, and a lot about our model for the future. If that part of the conversation is interesting to you, keep an eye out for a future episode where I'll dive deeper into the optiMize story and model. Until then, hope you enjoy this conversation with Julia, and thanks again for listening. It didn't feel like normal time.
No.
Still doesn't.
And it's so, it's interesting to come back here and realize that student life has sort of continued despite, now it just feels so much more normal than I was expecting it to be. Like, people just operate under the assumption that you're wearing a mask or you're doing all of these other things. But the union was full and people were studying. It's interesting to see the continuity of it because it feels like your experience ends here.
Yeah.
And then you come back and realize someone else's campus now.
So, I know. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
I still feel that a little bit, even though I've been here, for longer.
Yeah.
But
coming up on 10 years.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It feels strange.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I'd never, expected to be doing this for 10 years. But it doesn't feel like it's been that long either. I'm sort of wow, I'm in my mid-early 30s now.
Yeah.
Which
That's wild.
It depends how you count. I just turned 32 for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah.
And I guess we're rolling, by the way.
Go for it. Mine as well.
Fuck it. All right.
We're as ready as we'll ever be.
Yeah, for sure. So, 10 years. And I'm in my mid-early 30s, which Ozba and I have settled on the idea that 32 is mid-early 30s and not late early 30s. Because 30 itself doesn't count as 30s.
True.
Right? It's not. It's a transition year.
Yeah.
You're not in your 20s anymore, but you're really not in your 30s yet. You get a transition year.
Yeah.
When you're actually the zero number in any age.
I can definitely.
And so then early 30s become 31 through 33. Mid 30s, 34 through 36. 37 through 39 is late 30s. And then you're 40, which again, transition year.
Doesn't count.
It doesn't count. It's not 40s yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, which I wasn't sure if I agreed with that, but then I thought about it. It's I think you don't feel like you're in your 30s when you turn 30,
No, I think
you're still sort of, getting over your 20s.
You're getting used to the idea. You're processing whatever happened in the decade preceding. I wonder, being settled into your 30s, does it feel, and maybe this is more related to the 10-year anniversary of optiMize too, does it feel like what you expected it would be? Obviously, it's a surprise that we're still here and you have a staff of however many students and...
Yeah, 40.
Wild.
We should talk about that. I hadn't thought to talk about that, but about the story of kind of how the optiMize staff came to be even. Yeah.
And actually, I had asked Alec in prep for this podcast whether I was able to ask you questions too.
Oh, I'm spilling tea on myself. Yeah, for sure.
But no, I think it's so interesting coming up on 10 years and also me having, as I was reflecting, getting ready for this podcast, I was really thinking about what optimize meant to me and what my experience here was. And in doing so, I was really interested to hear, when you started this, what were you looking to build? And does it feel like 10 years in, that's changed in a fundamental way? Or does your initial mission still feel really aligned with what you're doing right now? Or vision, I guess.
Yeah. I think it definitely still feels aligned, and in many ways, like, beyond, what I initially could understand. I didn't have nearly as much sort of context for anything when we were starting, which is weird because in a sense it makes you more ambitious, because you just sort of like, well, I don't know how change happens. I don't know how universities work. I just know that we're going to do something amazing and badass, and like, and it's going to change everything,
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it was like, but I never thought about how long that would take, or would I still be here,
Yeah.
when I'm 30. And I didn't even conceptualize that really. So if someone had told me then that, yeah, you'll be mid early 30s, and
To use the correct
this
term.
is like the term that I'm like really big on now.
You should push it.
Everyone else is probably like, what is anyway, but if someone had said, yeah, you'll be here 10 years later and you'll have this title, director for social innovation, and you'll have this sweet space like right across from Angel Hall and big team and everything, I'd be like, wow, must be success, and then I would be surprised by the idea of like, well, and also, you'll be working with community colleges around the state, and you'll be, at this point, Michigan's fastest growing transfer program, bringing in a lot more students in. And now we're like building like curriculum, and we're going to be doing like courses and a whole sort of, there's some approvals that are still required, but it's in the works.
That's amazing.
So yeah, and like the numbers are way bigger. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought I remember the third year. It took us like till the third year to break even 100 projects in the program. No, it took us like the fifth year. And I thought like that's crazy. Like it took the first 4 years it was like, oh, we got like 70. That was huge, and to pass 100, it was like, wow, we're never
Yeah.
going to do that again. And now it's like almost 500 this year, and it's by like my sense of what we were doing, I think I would have felt like, wow, yeah, it's been a huge success. And in some sense, I feel that way, and so I'm really grateful for that. But also, part of the challenge is that once you get further into it, you get more context, and so you understand things better. And you're like, oh, wow, well, even though we have 1,000 some students engaged, and we've got all these projects going, and you look back to the history of the projects that have come out of this, and it's amazing stuff. You're like, oh, well, but the problems are still there, and like we're slowly making a dent in things, and but you don't just change things, and it's hard to know how you're changing things. Like I'm feeling confident that like looking back when I'm 40 or 50 or 60 or what, at the end of my life even, that optimize will have changed something, but I just don't actually understand how now. And I'm like at a phase where like, okay, I'm past like the sort of like, we're just going to change everything phase.
Yeah.
And I'm not into a cynical phase at all, but I'm just into this phase of like, I don't actually fully understand how this is going to change things. I know it is because it's gotten so much traction, both from the students and from the administrators and the faculty. And people around the country they resonate with it. People in community colleges resonate with it. But I just don't know how it works. We talk about, a few years back, we had this phrase, illuminate possibilities, kind of emerge. And I think that has become more of my sense of what kinds of changes we're making. It's like we're showing people that a different way of doing college is possible.
Yeah.
So, it's weird, though, losing that initial sort of sense of like totally naive belief.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I feel like, yeah, it's been a huge success. Otherwise, I feel like, wow, like I just know too much.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And from your perspective, does that feel really tied to the university system, thinking about education more broadly? Or is it bigger than that? Is it just how change happens at all? Right.
Yeah, it's bigger. Because we've both been in political campaigns now.
Yeah.
And I think, shit.
Boy, have we. Don't remind me.
I know it's well, but I mean that is a way change happens.
Yeah.
But you definitely. Well, I mean, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
We can come back to optimize. Obviously,
we will.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have to do an intro for this episode because we just I didn't even realize we were recording. Next thing I know, we are.
Yeah, it's okay.
But
we'll catch them up to speed.
yeah, I'm still new at this. People.
Yeah.
Have some patience.
Show some grace.
But I think I also was very involved in some political campaigns. I was, did the Abdul campaign and was, involved with the Bernie campaign. And I'm still sort of reflecting on all that because, just having COVID happen right after those elections. It was like the day after the Michigan primaries that COVID hit. And,
Yeah.
didn't really give a great chance to reflect for a while. But I understand the importance of political campaigns, and I know that it does affect change somehow. But I got to say, for all of the work that goes into those, if you don't win, at the end of the day, you're sort of just left being like, what did we really do? I mean, it comes down to a binary decision at the end. Do you win or not?
Yeah.
And neither of the campaigns I worked on won. The one you worked on won.
Actually, both of the ones that I worked on won.
You
so
picked better than me.
To be fair, I joined later in the game.
Yeah.
No, so we won with the coordinated in Michigan, and then we also won the coordinated runoff in Georgia. But I can completely sympathize with the idea of if you lose, what is... The question is, we didn't win. We don't get to enact the agenda that we decided was important to us, and we wanted to spend all of our time pushing and making sure that we enacted this vision for the future. But I also wonder if it's connected to what you were talking about earlier with optimize, which is just you're too far into it to really have the initial idealism of political campaigns or the end-all be-all, and this is great. And you're not far out enough to understand what movements you might be helping build, what infrastructure you might have put in place that didn't exist before. And to me, when I think of political campaigns and I start to get cynical about the idea of it's just about winning and losing, and if we're not doing this in the correct way, if we're not actually really incorporating communities in the way that we want to, what's the point of calling 500 people a day to get them to vote if you're not really talking about the issues that matter? And I think so much of the political campaigns that I was on, especially during COVID, it just felt like you're going to call everyone and you're going to get them to vote, and we're going to take care of everything else later.
Yeah. For sure.
The urgency of it is really, really strange, but I don't know, once you have some hindsight and once you have some space in between running those campaigns and just getting to look back at what you built, if that feels different.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, there's some people who just love the game, which I don't understand.
I don't either.
Campaigning for campaigning's sake is brutal. Yeah, I mean, maybe as you get older, you look back and you're like, okay, the things I was part of did create some changes in the arc of history or whatever. And you can study history and see that, which is what gives you enough belief to even get into something.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've seen that activism and campaigning can change things and that politics can change things. But yeah, you sort of have to take it on history, which is written by people who are creating narratives.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I've sort of refocused my attention mostly on optimize now. Not because I think it's wrong to be involved in political campaigns and that kind of ways of trying to make change, but more so just because with optimize I can go beyond a narrative. We have narratives. Everything in life is stories, right? And that's how we organize ourselves and everything. And make sense of the world. And so optimize is always telling stories about what we do also internally and externally, and that's important. And I believe in that, and I've done a lot of that. But I definitely felt as part of political campaigns, so much of that because you have to get so many people involved as volunteers and also as voters and as people. It's like the narrative is paper thin. It's like you've got your narrative and anyone can poke holes in it because it's paper thin, and most of the people involved don't actually have answers to the hard questions. And it's just like you've got your stock answer that the campaigns will basically give you of like, if someone asks about this, here's the story you tell. And it's like, you don't interrogate the stories because you believe I want to win. And so like, it's worth it to just like stay to the narrative, right? And if the narrative wins, then it's, but you really start to think about the fact that like, well, just like I can attack another candidate's narrative, people can attack my candidate's narrative too. And whereas with optiMize, it's like, yes, we have narratives, but I know the details and we can actually work on sort of like real things beyond just stories. And I think that that's sort of how I'm trying to now move my focus and direction is like, I want to be a part of things where I am part of the actually doing something rather than just like being a messenger of a narrative. Because even if you win, I was going to ask you this. So my candidate's lost. And so obviously, like you said, we, wanted to enact the change. But even if you win, are you part of the we? Like as soon as the campaign's over, they're kind of like, a very small number of you will actually come and do something meaningful with us, in whatever office we got elected to.
No, I think about that all the time. And to your point about storytelling for the sake of storytelling versus storytelling for the sake of really amplifying work that you think is important that you have done and backwards and forwards, I am so much more the latter, than I am the former. And I think about that with campaigns because, I'm not in an administration position. I'm not enacting an agenda. I do work that is tangential to that and kind of works alongside it and that I feel is important and ultimately guided by the agenda of an administration that I helped elect, which I think is broadly good. But it does, to me, it was really clear going into the 2020 cycle that I wanted to be a part of a political campaign. Right, I was graduating, COVID happened 6 weeks before, and I was actually at an organizing corps boot camp to get trained to be an organizer for the general election when Michigan shut down. So I missed my last college class, but I just knew that it was important. I knew that it was what I wanted to do, and it didn't really matter if this is what I wanted to do forever. But coming out of it, it's really clear to me that the urgency of political campaigns, the constant need to tell a story and to recruit and to sort of be on isn't my best mode of thinking. I would really much rather sink into a problem and figure out what's the solution here. And I think similarly to optimize, something that was so interesting is as soon as you steep yourself in something, you understand that an issue that you might have thought was really simple at the beginning is actually complex. And you can chase that question forever if you choose.
Right.
So I think political campaigns ask you to be a generalist, and I'm a bit more interested in finding what really drives me and chasing that until the line of inquiry sort of tapers off, runs out, whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. And, there are people, I guess, who excel at the other stuff, but it just...
And I know some of them, and they're remarkable people that are really good at their jobs and care deeply about the work. But I think at the end of the day, you can't force yourself to do something that's not your best mode of thinking. There are enough problems in the world that we need to solve that find what you like and what drives you and what you're good at and go with that.
Yeah, I think I don't regret having been a part of these sort of large-scale political efforts, and doing some local organizing as well. Like I think the local stuff sometimes you can actually feel like, okay, we did something. And
the issues better.
Right. And you're talking to people, like real people.
Yeah.
And not just as like the representative for the campaign at the door.
Yeah.
Delivering the campaign message, but you can actually like really talk to people.
Yeah.
So that makes a huge difference. I think that that's kind of like I'm glad that I had the experience of being part of these larger campaigns, because there is something to be said for there's certain things that you just need mass movements to achieve. And being part of that, especially when you're young, like, can be a really formative experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, both in terms of things you learn that are great and things that you learn that, you know, okay, I know I don't want to do that kind of operating anymore. But yeah, for me, I definitely feel like I didn't know, like, what impact did I personally really make, you know, in that. And I guess that's the thing. You don't know, right?
Yeah.
And it's just about doing what you can for the things that you believe in.
Yeah.
I think that's been a big learning for me over my 20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
But it's
Early
like
mid.
I don't regret, like, strongly believing in things, you know. But I also have learned that, like, some of those beliefs, like, weren't quite as solid as I thought they were at the time.
Yeah.
And so I think moving forward, like, I'm still gonna, like, be vigorously, like, working for the things that I care about.
Yeah.
But there is something to a little bit of humility to be like, but I might actually look back in a few years and be like, that particular way that I was doing things, like, maybe it wasn't the most effective way, you know?
And was that a realization you had when you were in political campaigns, or after reflecting on sort of your period of heavy involvement, did you realize I was maybe a little too black and white on stuff that was really actually gray, or a little too solid in some beliefs that, to your point, might have been shakier than you thought they were?
Yeah. I think it was, I mean, I basically got off social media after, like, the first summer of COVID, and I haven't been back on. And I think that has given me space to be like, I was just like, I mean, that's a whole other thing that, like, it's, you know, I don't regret doing door-to-door campaigning and stuff like that. I do sort of regret all the time I spent on social media, just, like, arguing with random people. Like, who just, like, I'd say something, someone random would attack me, I'd, like, bear down and be like, I'm not going to go down.
I remember the days.
Yeah. And I, you know, I've talked about this a little on this podcast already, but, like, you know, that's totally something that Facebook was engineering to happen. You know, it was like showing my posts to someone who would attack me and would be pissed off enough to do it. It's like the first thing they see when they get on is something that's going to make them mad enough to comment. And I'm, like, not a person who's going to go around commenting on other people's stuff and poking fights or anything like that. But if someone, like, comes at me, I'll fight back. Like that. I guess that's just how I am.
Yeah.
And, you know, so they're just totally engineering this for, like, public spectacle, because then other people would see it and, you know, spend more time on the site and all that kind of shit. But
no, and I think even with other social media sites, what's really interesting is days that when I start my day scrolling on my phone, checking Twitter, checking whatever social media site it might be, the way that I operate throughout the day, like, my baseline focus is so different.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of getting off social media as a way to figure out really what you want to dive into, what you want to think deeply about, even being able to read the entire article instead of reading the 140 character summary of the article, it fundamentally changes the way that you interact with people. Yeah. And this was one experience on the campaign that was so impactful and so important. Was I was in a Obama-Trump county, so we had a real mix of people that we were reaching out to with the campaign, and there was so much of the discourse that was going on in Democratic politics at the time that I had the words for it. I had the top line, what we were talking about. But to your point, as soon as someone poked a hole in my argument, I didn't really have the words, and I didn't have the argument, and I also didn't have the time and space in a campaign setting to really think deeply about why I cared about some of this stuff. And looking back, now that I've had some time and space, I have the words that I probably didn't have at that moment. But yeah, just realizing how much of it is like, these issues affect people's lives, and they deserve more than just 140 characters, and they deserve us really considering deeply both sides of some arguments are not both sides, to clarify.
Right. It's
but with some of
the
this
nuances
stuff,
of things, right? Yeah. Because that's the thing, is like these simple narratives are, I guess, necessary to do a large scale campaign, but when you're doing other kind of work, you realize like, well, the work I do isn't that simple.
Yeah.
You know, like, and so it's like, well, clearly, like the healthcare system's not going to be that simple
Yeah.
either, right? And these are the things that we're yelling at each other about as if we're experts on it.
Yeah.
And again, it's not to say that people shouldn't be fighting for Medicare for all or for whatever, you know, plan you support. Like, I think that it is important to some extent, pick something and support it if you
Yeah.
feel like it's in the direction of your values. But yeah.
And to your point with local organizing, that feels like such a big distinction because instead of coming top down of these are broad campaign objectives
Right.
and we're going to figure out a way to make it relevant to local context. And I am not a local organizer, so correct me if I'm wrong on the process of this, but you're going door to door, you're talking with your neighbors, you're figuring out what the real issues are that people care about and just trying to solve problems.
Right.
Which, when I was initially attracted to organizing, that's exactly what I wanted to do because that felt like what we did at optiMize too.
Yeah.
Right? You're asking students to come into a space and tell you what they care about, what their communities care about, what our world more broadly needs. And to me, that just feels like the way.
Yeah. It's like you know, an actual sort of community-driven model for seeding new ideas and trying to get traction for them and supporting each other and doing that. Yeah, I mean, that's totally what we've been doing. And I think, you know, one of the things I want to talk with you about is kind of how that like community-driven element played a role in your own experience. And
Yeah.
it is interesting to contrast it to things, you know, that we've seen since and like ways in which that does or doesn't happen. And but like, what was that like for you? I mean, I have to remember back to exactly when I met you or how you even got involved. Did you find us at Festival?
I didn't find you at Festival. I was actually a freshman. I think it was my second semester already. And I was...
Oh, was it Shiner?
No, it was actually... So Shiner is the one that eventually really looped me into optiMize. But... And that was sort of my origin story in my head. And then I was thinking back to it. And I had a friend, Gabe, who knew my freshman year that I was struggling. I was... For those who have heard me tell this story before, they'll know I was thinking of leaving Michigan. I really wanted to transfer. I came here and I thought it was going to be really clear what I wanted to do and that having all of these opportunities would feel just exciting and good. And I came here and just felt lost. And
sort of like the marketing and all the like...
Yes. I'm like, there's so many possibilities.
Yeah.
And I'm paralyzed thinking about like what I actually want to do. And I don't know what kind of clarity I was thinking would come as soon as I stepped in, as soon as I like matriculated.
Yeah.
But it didn't come. And so I was just kind of bopping around my first semester, trying to figure it out, really considering leaving. And Gabe, who is wonderful, said, I know this organization, optiMize. I've been thinking of going to a workshop. Would you want to come along? I did not understand what optiMize was. It was really confusing to me what everyone was trying to do because we really jumped in the middle of it. And so I kind of walked away after freshman year, having had an introduction to it, thinking that the people there were really cool, being generally confused about what they did. And then sophomore year, Shiner approached me and she's like, I really think you should try this in earnest. And it completely transformed my college experience. I don't know if I would have stayed at Michigan without it. And beyond that, when I look back at my time at Michigan, school feels second to what I learned in this space. And also just the people that it brought into my life. Like, it absolutely changed the way I think about everything. Yeah,
What do you think it was about it that, like, sort of sparked that sort of transformation? With, like, the benefit of a little bit of hindsight, I guess.
Yeah. I think coming back to a different type of community element of optiMize, not necessarily like the issue-driven community element of it, but just having people on campus who felt like I just felt really safe here immediately. The way that folks welcome you into workshops, the way that this team has just been built out with like the care, like the care that it took to create this team and the intention behind it of just saying, we want to create real big impactful change here on campus. It felt like we were all really drawn together by something bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so much of what optiMize provided for me was just this community where it was okay for me to try and fail a lot and take responsibility for things that, like, I don't know of any other program on any other campus that allows students to take the helm of an organization in earnest the way that optiMize lets students lead. And to me, just knowing that I had a group of people that were going to push me to grow, but were also going to like catch me if I fell, cheer me on when I got back up, it gave me the confidence, I think, to do well outside of optiMize, but also I just really got hooked. As soon as I had that feeling of I can take the lead on this and I can work alongside these students to build this really incredible program. Yeah, it just felt like the only thing that I wanted to do at Michigan. My parents used to joke, they're like, we're so glad we're helping you pay for college and you're using all your time at optiMize. Like, you have to go to class. And I did, to clarify, but occasionally. But it just felt secondary. Like, this was my college learning experience.
Yeah, I think that the idea of actually having responsibility for things is big.
Yeah.
And like trusting students to do that.
Yeah.
There's something about like receiving trust that creates trustworthiness. You know?
No, I think that's completely correct. And to me, it was just, I don't know if I was capable of, alongside, these 5 other folks, leading a challenge for a year. I probably wasn't when I started. I definitely wasn't when I started. And I think just by virtue of you and so many others that had more experience within optiMize and were sort of on the university side staff, we just figured it out. And I think having that confidence, like, we just knew we could solve problems and we had a strong enough bond as a team to be able to work through them. And I really do think that giving trust to people breeds trustworthiness. You hand over something really precious to you, and then we want to take care of it. We want to do the best thing we possibly can with this challenge that we get to direct for a year. And that felt so core to everything that we were doing. Was it 2018? I don't even know what year it was.
I don't know what it is. You graduated in 2020.
2018 to 2019 then, I think.
Yeah.
And it just felt so core. We had 1 year to really figure out how we can make this the best we could be. And we were entrusted with something that was important to you, but it was also really important to us at that point. And I just think broadly, if given the chance, students are always going to rise to the occasion. And what's critical there is the support, right? It's not throwing you out into the wild, seeing what happens, good luck. It's, I believe that you can do this. I know that you can do this. I'm going to be here to help, give you all the information you need to know to execute this properly. And I'm also going to be your cheerleader. Yeah. But I think giving students the space to just say, if there's a problem, I trust that you can figure it out, right? You don't have to come to me with, like you, Jeff, saying, you don't have to come to me with every single problem you have. Like, I really trust that you have the ability to do this. And And I think we do, but so often we're not given the ability to exercise that muscle.
Yeah. It's interesting how it's almost like an evolution of the student organization ecosystem at Michigan, which laid the foundation for something like this to even grow and exist, which was sort of like, we've got a structure where you can create an entity as students super quickly, right? And you sort of exist within the university. But the traditional model was then you'd go find an advisor from some department that you thought was relevant, a faculty member or something. And that can be great. And I'm sure that there's tons of examples out there of advisors who are super committed and that the relationship is fantastic. But there's something different with having like me and the other full-time staff members who it's like our job is to do this organization too. And we're all power sharing basically. And so like it is on you to design and lead the thing this year and do the communications for it and basically hold the community together. But it's also on us.
Yeah.
Right. And we can't do it without you being sort of out front of us.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea is that it's a student-led community. It can't be like us out front just telling the students what to do, right?
Yeah.
But I found it was interesting that you said like the fact that it was so important to me made it like feel like, oh, okay, like we have to do like as well as we can too, because it's important to us, but also to this other person who is so invested in this, which I hadn't really thought about before. The fact that like I'm so invested actually creates a sense of like commitment from students too.
And I also think on top of that, we had reached a point in the organization's history by my year on lead team. Are you calling it lead team still, or is there a new name?
We call it leadership team now.
Okay, great. I know that it was in flux, so I wanted to be up to date. But I think by the time that we were in leadership team as well, we had reached this point on campus where there were people that had come through the challenge or had come through the organizing team, and it was really beloved by them too. So even more than your vision, like your initial more than your initial vision for optiMize, it had now become a really important part of so many people's college experiences that it felt really important just to shepherd it as well as we could through that year.
I think that's so interesting. This is something that we're working on right now, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. This episode might just be us sort of like brainstorming optimized ideas at a
That's
certain
okay.
point.
And I do have to caveat that I did wake up at 4 o'clock this morning, so if I'm ever incoherent, just right side me.
No, this is great. So I think it's a really interesting insight that if you find yourself in a role in a community that matters to you, the amount that responsibility, like the level of responsibility rises when you see other people who also care a ton about it and they're doing something for it, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of like a network effect, and at some point it's like that's how the community sustains itself, you know?
Yeah.
And there are some key pillars of the community where if someone left and they weren't replaced by someone who could fill their role, like it would be hard. But on the whole, like we've sustained losing basically everyone. Like I'm the only person who's been here the whole 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's like every year we lose someone who we're just like, how do we possibly continue without them? They've become so central. I mean, yourself included, more than most, and but it continues because there's more people who are all doing this. One thing that's been a lot harder though is how do you keep that sense of the importance of it once somebody's no longer like directly day-to-day involved. So even like you're now 2 years out, and we email you and ask you to be a mentor, and you come to be a mentor. But I don't think that there's still the same sense of like I'm part of this, right? Or is there? I mean, how does that feel to you?
That is really interesting, and it's something that I've thought about because I think by the time that I was leaving school, graduating, there had been a little bit of a shift because our student staff had gotten built up.
Yeah.
And right, even the physical move of moving offices from Wiser to the building that we're in now, it felt like optiMize was entering a new stage. And by the time I was leaving, it felt like the right time for me to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's necessarily a problem to be solved or if it's a sign of an organization that's really healthy, because
Sure.
there are new students coming in that have new ideas that I think are amazing and really cool. And it's going to look different than the optiMize that I was a part of.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? I love it and I loved it, but there's a part of the 2018 to 2019 challenge that I'm always going to hold really dear. And maybe the 2021 challenge is way better for the needs of the students right now.
Right.
And that's why it should be student-led. It's because the people that are on this campus, that are going to class every day, that are talking to their peers, that are, right, dealing with the world that COVID has created, to bring that into it, like, they're the ones who know the needs of the Michigan community best. And the people actively involved in the challenge are hopefully the ones that also know the needs of their community best. And so I do feel really connected to it, but I think there's a natural separation of just it's someone else's vision now, which is really great.
You feel connected to it in the fact that you played a part in the evolution of it, I guess, right? And a major part.
Yeah.
And that's a good insight, because in some ways, if all of the alumni were still so engaged and they felt like ownership, like we need to keep this the same.
Yeah.
Or even if the staff was the same year after year, organizations get so sort of like stagnant because it's just like we need to be what we were before. But yeah, that's actually a good point that like new people coming in and other people leaving on a pretty frequent basis with some amount of overlap, can create a really interesting, evolving community, sort of an evolving organism almost,
Yeah.
With the principle being the same, that when you're here, you can help guide this, and that's the responsibility of it. And it's weird though for me as the person who's been here the whole time to experience that, because
I was going to ask.
Like, I understand why organizations get rigid.
Yeah.
Because when you're here and it's constantly changing around you, it is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's like I sort of had gotten used to like this team and the way that we did things and this context. And then, it's just constantly changing.
Does that ever feel like a lonely place for you to be?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it used to more before I sort of understood that that's what it was.
Yeah.
I think now, having been through like so many years of cycling people out who in my mind were like, I can always count on that person, you know. I've just sort of learned, okay, that's the nature of this. And so either I adapt to that and understand that, I just need to build relationships in that context versus, there's sort of a little bit of fear of like, oh, like I'm going to get to know someone so well and we're going to like learn how to work with each other. I mean, it's like, it's hard to learn how to work with me sometimes. I think. And so like, it takes a little while for people to figure out how I operate.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't know, I'm a little bit weird, I guess. And so
in a wonderful way, I think, but yes, no, I completely agree. It's just, there's a natural adjustment period to the Jeff Sorensen experience.
I have I'm not completely unstructured, but I have a strange structure of how I kind of do things, I guess. And it takes people a while to learn that. And it takes me a while to learn how everyone new operates too.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of like, man, like I'm going to invest like 2 years in this with you. And by the end of it, we're going to feel like, man, we could be awesome next year. And then, but no, you're going to leave.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, now I got to like, but what I've sort of learned is that there's something beautiful in that process of continually like reinvesting, you know? And it doesn't mean that the relationship is gone. I mean, obviously like, I haven't seen you in 2 years, but we still obviously like had that experience together that was so important to both of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little strange.
And that feels like such a different way that you need to learn to let go. Because for me, there's the leaving part.
Yeah.
I felt like I was ready to go and that the organization was in good hands and that it was just going to change in ways that were beyond my control for the right reasons. But I also sometimes consider how much of that was me knowing that I had to leave, right? Making up the reason that this felt good in my mind and just having to walk away. And it not necessarily a question or some like grand statement on what you just said, but it feels really interesting to me how you learn that process of letting go when you're staying in the same place, when you're not the one that's leaving.
Mm-hmm.
How do you exercise that same level of kind of relinquishing control?
Yeah. I've sort of wondered, like, what is the role that I have here, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's changed over time, but, you know, aside from, like, the obvious stuff, like, it's always easy to list, like, job responsibilities. Like, okay, I have to do the fundraising. That's, you know, but if I wasn't here, someone else, tons of people in the world fundraise.
Yeah.
So, like, someone else could do that. But I have thought about, like, what is with, you know, hundreds or more than 1,000 people together under one sort of sense of community. And we have, you know, guiding principles and a mission and vision that we talk about all the time. And I think people embrace that, and people embrace kind of the ways of treating each other. But I do wonder a little bit, like, okay, so we've done this experiment now for 10 years where everyone leaves except me.
Yeah.
And it's still not just fine. I mean, it's like...
Thriving.
Thriving, yeah. In ways that I wouldn't have designed, you know, like a lot of our transfer student work and community college work is thanks to the work of Katie Avila, you know, and Anna Patchen, who put that work together. And that's because, like, you know, especially Katie, after working in the full-time role for that for many years, her life experiences led her to create new things that I wouldn't have thought to create. So it's not like my role is to do everything. But I have wondered, like, what happens if I leave? You know? Everyone else can leave, and it continues, and it grows in all kinds of new, interesting ways. Do I have, like, an anchor role, or am I just another role now?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, because it is weird to me that many people with so much turnover year over year can hold, like, can hold things together even.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for things to just not, like, immediately crash and burn, but just sort of, like, start losing momentum, and sort of, like, you get, you know, drift of what the mission is, and some people think it's this, other people think it's that, and, you know, this happens to organizations all the time.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if I have some role of being, like, the person who says, like, sort of like, yes, this, no, that, occasionally. You know, not, like, by dictator kind of approach. And on the day-to-day basis, I think this is a very, like, non-hierarchical kind of organization. But there is a hierarchy, and I'm at the top of it.
Yeah.
And at some point, if there's something that is being talked about or proposed that's going to take a lot of time and resources, and I don't think it's a good idea, like, you know, it's not going to happen without me. Yeah. But on the other hand, it might not happen without someone else who has veto power, which is anyone on the leadership team in any given year. But so I don't know. I've sort of thought about that, like, what would happen if I left?
No, and I think that's...
I'm not asking you to have the answer.
No,
but
I certainly will not give it because I don't have it. But that is really interesting, just to think about what your role is in the organization. And the answer is that you don't know what it would look like to have you gone until you leave.
Yeah.
And, like, there's no way to know if the mission holds steady, if all the go, no-go decisions are the right ones until you walk away. If you do at some point. I don't know what your plans are.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about it. I mean, I'm not thinking about leaving, like, imminently. Yeah. Don't worry. But
I was like, I don't know if we want to break news.
Listeners, I should be telling you this now. I mean, but I've been here now for a decade of my career, my whole career. Yeah. And you definitely do start to feel once you're in your 30s of, like, well, like doors are closing, you know, like
Yeah.
there's paths that I can't take anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're in your 20s, you could reasonably probably get on almost any path
Yeah.
if you really decided to do it
Yeah.
all in. Once you're in your 30s, that doesn't happen as much. You know, there's paths that you're too late now to like get on a track that you want to be on. So yeah, I'm reflecting on like, is my track just like higher education administration, you know, and like
Yeah.
trying to create structures and conditions for this kind of community to exist,
Yeah.
you know, more broadly here at this university or elsewhere. But at some point, I'm going to have to leave. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be here when I'm 80.
Wouldn't that be a sight
Can you
to see,
imagine?
though? optimize's 60th anniversary.
Right? Yeah.
Also,
Yeah. Jeff's still here.
Jeff is 85 and he is still running optimize.
Everyone's a student-led organization.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
so proud to be playing the support role.
I mean, we have other systems and organizations that operate on that model of having 80-year-olds in leadership. So
Yeah, I mean,
why not you?
everyone trying to run the country is about
Yeah.
that role. So, but yeah, so at some point it's going to happen. And it's interesting just to think about, like, is there some, like, it would change. It would
Yeah.
have to change, you know? Whoever came in after me, like, do they have to become, like, fill a role that I can't communicate because I don't understand it? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm an anchor or
Yeah.
if I'm just, you know, I think I am, but I don't know to what extent.
Yeah.
Or in what ways. So, like, do you ask someone to do that, or do you sort of say, no, the community now is going to evolve and it's going to sort of spread in different kinds of ways? I don't know. I mean, decision making is already like not authoritative. So we already have consensus decision making, but it's more of a culture thing, I think.
And I guess if you had to say right now what your role is on the team, and just to expand a little bit on what anchor means to you, does that mean the anchor really tying all of our work to make sure that we're creating structures and systems within the University of Michigan and higher education more broadly that allow experiential learning programs to happen? Is that innovation work that's focused on the ground impact? What would you say is your most critical role? Or if someone said, Jeff, I need a 10-second elevator pitch on what you're trying to do with optimize.
Yeah.
I guess what would be the answer now?
I think it's culture. Like, I think I'm the main person responsible for sustaining the culture.
Yeah.
And that's like everything from, you know, when you have hundreds of people involved in an organization, like, there's always going to be different senses of how they're feeling about the organization and the work that's being done. And it's sort of like, and also there's so much going on in people's lives and in the world that to have an organization that not only is as big as ours, but as diverse as ours, like, I see a big part of my role as sort of like helping people thrive in that kind of context, because we see all over the place that it's not always easy to actually have a very diverse organization because people see things from different perspectives, and you do something one way and someone sees it in another way, or mistakes happen because people are, you know, coming from different life perspectives. So I think like a big part of my role is helping people sort of almost like keep a balance of like an appropriate amount of frustration with the world and with like even with optimize itself sometimes. And an appreciation for the fact that like everyone around in this community is trying to work in a relatively common direction. But then also just like, I think a huge part of my role is modeling to people how to respond when we do mess up, you know? Like if there's really big mistakes, like you know, it happens, you know, there's things where something happens where members of your community feel alienated or you know, don't feel like they were treated right or valued. And it's like that ultimately is always me apologizing. Like it has to be. Even if I wasn't really involved, it's like my role is to make sure that like no one in our community ever feels like they're not valued.
Yeah.
And so like that's another big part of it too, I think. And in some ways I guess that's how I feel about like the anchoring thing, is like just making sure that it doesn't all sort of float off in the natural like entropy and chaos of things, and in the fact that when there's this many people together, it's not that easy to keep everyone collaborating positively.
And at this point in the organization's history, I guess less the history, just more the size of optiMize as it currently stands. How many people strong is optiMize?
In terms of like participants, it'll be over 1,000 this year. So it's a lot.
That's bonkers.
Yeah. And there's like 500 projects in the Social Innovation Challenge alone this year. So it's just a lot of different ideas too.
It's a lot of different ideas. And I guess my question for you, and this is me just getting up to speed on what optiMize looks like today too, but how much of that feels like setting a culture, and how much of that at some point just needs to be creating process?
Yeah.
Right, with 1,000 people, you can be the best messenger in the world, and there's still going to be misinterpretations of what the mission is. So right now, are there things that you all are doing or things that you're thinking about how to really just like ingrain the mission, the vision of optiMize into how business is conducted on the day-to-day?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, part of it is sort of like diffusion through our leadership team, you know, because, you know, like I said, I'm the one who's handling any like really major issues. But there's some, I mean, I shouldn't even say that, because like there are major issues all the time that members of our team handle in a way that really reflects the values and culture of our team. So I think like part of it is I've always thought is like, your leaders need to be modeling the behavior and the culture that you want everyone to have. And then it can spread pretty well, because like if you have 40 leaders, that the amount of interaction and access that 1,000 participants get is actually pretty good. I mean, you know, that's like 20, it's like 20 participants per leader, a little more. And that's totally reasonable. You know, you're going to get interaction with someone, you know, on a regular basis. And so I think a lot of it is just like behavioral thing, like making sure that your leaders are modeling. It's a much bigger problem for us if one of our leadership team members is behaving in a way that really is not aligned with our culture and values than if any particular participant is. Because that's then a signal to everyone that like they're representing optiMize, you know, in a way that a participant is but isn't as much. So it's partly that, but then it is too. It's about thinking about how do you create like automated systems where someone takes some action and then a series of things like dominoes fall to helping them get to the next action, and communicating automated to them while still feeling the same kind of like, even those need to be designed in a way that make people feel really valued. And that's like a whole field of, you know, UX design and stuff like that now. But so.
And how do you make stuff efficient enough that in the moments where it really matters, you're able to be present, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The best use of my time is not to send 500 individualized emails. It's to say, MailChimp, here, do your thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then to be able to spend however many minutes you would have spent on sending a message or doing some little task, to sit in the office and talk with a team that comes in, or help troubleshoot with another member of leadership, or that is interesting though. I think the idea of 1,000 participants,
it's a lot, though. It's really just it's like it's an expansion of scale, but we were already, even like the year that you were president, we were dealing with the same problems, because even once you have 100 people doing something, you know, where they're each working on their own project in their own way, and they're all participating in sort of this overarching program structure to help them do it. Like out of those 100 people, anytime you send a communication, there's like at least 20 different like sub personas of like this person has done this, but not this. And they like, so when you communicate to them, like they need to like hear it in a certain way, but you can't actually make like, I mean, if you had like a ton of resources like Google or something, that I feel like they personalize everything, but like you need to write things in such a way that like all 20 of those sort of people are going to still like feel like, okay, this email is speaking to my experience. It's not easy to do.
And how do you do that without just diluting the message so far beyond what anyone can actually connect with?
Right. Well, and then, because that, I mean, that's the road to what we talked about earlier in the episode of, I mean, you take it to the extreme, and it's like, how do you, as the president of the United States, actually communicate a shared message to all these people? I mean, it's just too many people.
It's so many people.
Yeah, it's like 300 and some million people. Like, you can't possibly actually speak and have people feel like, they're speaking to me.
Yeah.
You know, if you can get even a few million people to feel like you're speaking to, that's a huge accomplishment. Yeah. Because as we saw, even when you're dealing with like 100 people, it's actually not that easy to have that kind of personalized communication and relationship building and everything. Yeah. Which is why large organizations are tough. And oftentimes people don't actually feel all that great of an affinity to the leader of a large organization, I think, for those reasons.
Yeah. And I think that was something I still felt in our year. I remember sitting with you and Jeff Pittich actually saying we wanted to see if we could get 250 applications. Like that was going to be our high point. And I think we got like
360 or something like that.
364 or something like that. It was wild. And even that year I felt still such an affinity for it and such a connection to it, which I think is a testament to the fact that it was a strong organization to begin with a really strong message that rather than focusing on scaling, we focused on getting it right at a smaller scale. Yeah. And then because it was such a great program, people heard about it, people wanted to join, right? It grew, I think, more organically. Yeah. But I think it's a testament to how well you all have done. But it's just in my mind, it's so interesting to think about what the next 10 years looks like, how big it's going to get, and how you just really retain that initial passion of like a couple of college kids scrapping together a social innovation challenge. Yeah. That is now something a lot greater than what it was 10 years ago.
I don't know. I mean, we definitely got lucky with that "why not me" phrase because a lot of people attach to that. Yeah. And it turned out like, oh, wow, it actually means a lot more than we realized when we first put it out there the first year. And it's created this very inclusive culture, which I think is so important to what optiMize is now. It's not just about asking like, why don't I take action? But it's also about like, I need to think honestly and with humility about reasons when there are good reasons why not me. And if I can ask myself this question, everyone else should be able to also. And so we want to welcome everyone in. And it's like it created this whole thing that people attach to in all kinds of different ways. And it's kind of interesting to think about how like part of growing a community is having really solid like principles that are also sort of like catchy that people remember, Yeah. And I feel like in corporate settings, it's harder to do that maybe because everyone there knows that ultimately you're driven by your bottom line. Yeah. Whereas nonprofits, for all the downfalls, because we do have to constantly be raising money, and it's not actually attached to performance all that closely. It's like it's a totally different sort of game and metrics on the fundraising side. But at least on the sort of community side, when you're people believe that we're really there to help everyone ask why not me and succeed at what they're doing because that's really what we're there for. Like we're not saying that in order to drive a financial metric. Yeah. It's like we actually are doing that.
And oh, by the way, the why not me, that question does not hold weight if the people coming into the organization because they see someone wearing a very comfortable optiMize t-shirt. If they come into the organization and they don't feel like we're really digging into that question or we're really following our mission, it doesn't matter, right? And
it's just words on the website at that point. Yeah,
it's just yeah, it's just a slogan. And I think to loop back to an earlier point in the conversation, talking about political campaigns and kind of feeling that you're storytelling for the sake of storytelling at times, this feels like a case where optiMize has really refined how to tell its story about how it sees itself in order to spread the message and make sure people are aware and just be really clear on what the mission and goals are. But then you come into the challenge or one of our various programs that we're now running through optiMize, and you feel that. Like, you feel the support, you feel the curiosity, you feel the sense that we have a chance to figure out what is possible. And that is because it's a well-run organization that has really been intentional about inviting people into the space that are really approaching this with the right intent.
Yeah.
And also, I think, again, to your earlier point, being accountable for, like, if we make mistakes, if we need to fix something, we're going to fix it. We're not going to let problems exist in perpetuity. We're going to really address this as a community. And ultimately, this is a program for and by the students, and they should have a say in how all of this runs. And I think that has always been, it's always just felt honest.
Yeah.
The slogan it does feel like a guiding principle more than just a marketing.
Yeah, and ultimately it's about education, right? And think about what that is. I mean, like, a political campaign could have a great slogan, and people might join wholeheartedly, like, believing that that's like, but ultimately they're there to win power. Like, it's the pursuit of power for a representative of the people who doesn't have any actually formal tie to anyone who works for them while they're going. I mean, Obama completely dismantled his whole organizing apparatus once he got in office. A huge mistake. That's a whole additional conversation. But like, that's the pursuit of power. Or if you're in a company, like, ultimately the company is pursuing, profits for its shareholders, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, like, a well-run company can be a very good thing for the world. And a political campaign that does seize power and has a chance to make changes can be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you're a participant in either of those, you kind of know that, like, the ultimate goal, though, is the pursuit of power or profit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with education, it's this amazing part of our shared society that we've created these institutions that, at least at their best, aren't here for the pursuit of power or profit. It's truly to help people become who they want to become, And I think that because, like, we still have to deal with money and bureaucracy and all those kinds of things, but the actual purpose of the organization is sort of only focused on that. And people really feel that.
Yeah. And I guess just to push on that a little bit and to consider the trajectory of optiMize from this really tiny organization to now a more formal part of the university, are there ways in which you feel like the bureaucracy or just kind of the increasingly institutionalized version of optiMize that is a little bit more ingrained in the university system, are there challenges that have come up with, like, staying really clear on that message and not getting distracted by what all of the other requirements of being part of a university system require?
Yeah, there have. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I'm still developing is I had to make the transition myself of thinking of myself as basically an extended student. When we started it when I was a student.
Yeah.
And then I did get a job here. But I still sort of just felt like, I'm being paid to do this work, but I'm still basically the same thing. I felt like I was just part of the student team. And now I am embracing the idea that, like, if people ask me, like, what do you do? It's like, I'm a university administrator. I never would have thought that. And I might have not have felt good about that before. But now it's like, well, that's my role now. It's grown to a point where it needs to have like it needs administrators. Like
Yeah.
it's a part of this institution and it's being institutionalized, right? And if we didn't want that, we shouldn't have done it inside an institution. You know, at some point, like if you want it to sustain within an institution, it becomes part of the institution.
Yeah.
And that process, you know, I mean, managing an institution as large and complex as a research university the size of Michigan, which by research dollars is the largest research university in the world, is incredibly complex and has over 200 years. I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of time for any organization to exist. Has built up so many procedures and policies and all these things that, you know, you spend a lot of your time navigating those and figuring out how to, you know, stay afloat in all of those. But I will say it's like anything, you know, you just learn how to do it. And now I'm way better at it. And I know like what I can ignore and what I have to really do. And, you know, make sure that I do the things I really have to do really well and don't waste a bunch of time on the things that I didn't actually really need to be doing. And just were sort of like, it's just excess process occasionally, you know? And you learn like how the people in the institution work and, you know, who you can rely on and what different roles are and, you know, who you should be asking for help before you try to do something instead of needing them to help you fix it later, right? And so there is a way to develop sort of an administrative elegance, and I've seen some really good administrators who have this. And the best administrators are ones who understand the processes and respect them because you have to, right? You can't just like bulldoze through these things because an institution like Michigan or like a government or something like that will be like, who are you compared to this institution? Like you're nothing, you know, like this is the institution is the thing. And so you have to respect them, but the best administrators keep a real sense of humor about things. And like can sort of joke about all that's going, you know, that they're going through to accomplish what they want. And if you can do that, that's not such a bad way to live. You know, you have to do the sort of minutia stuff sometimes, but if you can sort of keep it light. So that's what I've been trying to do. And I think the biggest risk to me in the early years of sort of not yet embracing this transition for myself was that dealing with all the administrative work and dealing with bureaucratizing optimize basically, that I felt like I didn't know how to handle it. And so the energy that I would generate inside of myself from doing that work for a few hours, then if I went back to optimize, I would just have this bad energy, you know? And I think I've now learned how to like do that with a little bit of lightness of spirit and sense of humor and sort of go back to my real optimize work, you know, with that same kind of spirit. Because you have to, otherwise the bureaucracy will eat the organization, and it happens so often. So,
and you get jaded.
Yeah,
right?
People do. Yeah.
If you're not able to understand, to put it in perspective of like, this is some of the stuff I have to check off my list to ultimately do what I really, really love to do. Then I think it can become really difficult. And processes and procedures, to your point, important, but you can get bogged down in them really easily and forget the overall mission of why you're doing what you're doing. And I think especially for you, viewing yourself as someone that helps set a baseline culture within optiMize is if you have bad bureaucratic, I don't want to be here energy, like that trickles down to everyone.
Oh, totally.
And I guess on a positive note, and to ask you this question, is there work that's going on at optiMize right now that feels like really energizing to you beyond everything?
Definitely. Definitely. I think like, you know, when I look at what we're doing now and what we can do in like the next 2 years, I'm super excited. I just feel like we have so much possibility ahead of us, partly because we made it through the pandemic so strong. Like we just were built for it, you know, like we built a resilient organization that as soon as COVID hit, like the team did not like struggle to figure out how to make it through it, you know, and I think we ended up being one of the, we've heard from so many students that like optiMize was the place that felt like it really was thriving even amid all of that. And so
That's amazing.
Then you look at sort of relativity compared to some other, like, well, I don't have anyone specific in mind. I just know that like optiMize is like relatively even more attractive than it used to be because we made it through it so well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that we've built a system where the ideas aren't coming from me. I'm not like top downing most of these things. And so I just get to like, see like what our teams are creating, both in the like the social innovation challenge, the project teams, but then within our own organizing team too, of incredible programs with community colleges and transfer students and, amazing work with like automation and technology to make the challenge run more smoothly. Just incredible community building efforts to keep optiMize as like a super relevant community on campus, 10 years in. Really wonderful storytelling stuff that sort of, we're going to be doing a lot of it for the 10th anniversary this year of, going to people like you and sort of saying, tell us that story of that year and a half, 2 years that was so meaningful to you. Like we want to make sure that that's in the record, And then just, so much like mentoring work and bringing in incredible people to work with students and seeing ideas and projects flourish. So like every day that I see what's happening in optiMize, I just feel like I'm grateful to be able to be a steward of this in a certain way. And I've also learned like there's certain things that I'm in a position to do that I can kind of do on the side almost as something that if it comes together, then it'll become part of optiMize. But, until then, I can kind of just like tinker with things. So like we're really working on like new curriculum opportunities in the classroom because optiMize has always been out of the classroom.
Yeah.
But like you said, like so many students have had that experience that you had of like, I go to class, but like optiMize is where I'm learning the most.
Yeah.
It's like, well, maybe we could get you credit for some things.
Yeah, exactly. My parents would have appreciated that very much.
So I've learned like, okay, in my administrative role, I can like work on some things that it doesn't really make sense to have like student teams working on yet.
Yeah.
But I can start getting the groundwork laid where if I can get a door opened enough, then you get a bunch of student teams being like, what kinds of classes should we do?
Yeah.
Because now we have a door open, which we're basically almost to that. Like, so I've sort of, I've come to appreciate that. Like there actually are good things about the administrative work too.
Yeah.
Because you can sort of just like open up these opportunities for students to then come in and lead in new ways.
Yeah.
So.
And it's also such a cool example of you looking at just why don't we have a class about this? Like, why isn't there curricula around innovation or all of the stuff that we're dealing with in the challenge that feels so relevant both to students' lives at university, but also beyond that? Why wouldn't it just be a class? Why wouldn't it count? And by virtue of your position in this organization, you get to poke the right person and ask them, can we do this? And there are just a lot of people that probably have never thought of it or didn't have the time to do it and just by you asking, you get to open a door to something that's a completely new experience for a lot of students. And I think that universities do need to change in that way because I felt so insufficient in the classroom and I felt so much more myself and so much more confident and capable when I was in the optiMize offices.
Why do you think that was?
That's a really good question. And I think it comes back to the idea of the size of Michigan. Really, in the beginning of school, to me, my classes were so big. The way I learned was not by filling in a bubble or doing an equation. Almost failed a couple math classes in Michigan. But to me, it was so much, I learned so much better when I was able to sit across the table from someone and talk about a problem and figure out a solution and just get to be a little bit more creative and think outside of the box. And I think for me, it also just came down to, at Michigan, it's a competitive place. There are a lot of really smart people that want to do well here. And I came in as a freshman thinking that my GPA mattered, how big my friend group was mattered, like all of these things that you come into college thinking are the most important. And optiMize gave me a community that I felt really confident in. I felt like I had a place at the university to always come back to. But then it also gave me a chance to just explore a different way of doing college. My GPA was not the most important thing to me in college. Going out and being the most popular person on campus was not the most important thing to me in college. What ended up being really important to me was getting to build a community with people that were really passionate about problems that they saw around them, and just having this general spirit of we're going to pursue really important critical work with a lot of joy.
Yeah.
And optiMize for me was the experience that opened the door to everything else at Michigan, because I just understood that there was not a right or wrong answer to anything. Like, my university experience was my university experience. There's someone out there that looks at it and probably goes, I would have rather spent all of my time researching and in the classroom.
Yeah.
And
that's fine.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is so awesome for someone that wants to do that. But for me, I think I loved optiMize so much, and it felt so right with who I was and so aligned with how I worked and what my values were. Both aligned by it, and I think my values and what I cared about was shaped by optiMize.
Yeah.
And to me, it just, because I loved it so wholeheartedly, I just knew that it was the right thing, and what everyone else was chasing mattered a whole lot less.
Yeah. There's something too, actually, just having experience where you're learning what it's like to love what you're doing. and
Absolutely.
You know, not in the sense of like every day is amazing, it's all just like rainbows, because like, it's not. I mean, like, you know, I care deeply about this organization. It's very aligned with me, but there's a lot of the work I have to do. It's like, it's my job to do this work. I need to do this work, right? Like, so I don't want to like get that twisted that like every day should be your passion day. Like,
no,
it's just not.
It's
right?
definitely not.
But it's about being a part of something where your sense of purpose is like aligned.
Yeah.
And you like feel like, okay, I care a lot about this, right?
Yeah.
Which for me, like, that's been one of the hugest learnings now that I think about it, is that also thank you to this lovely honking person outside.
I hope their day gets better.
Yeah, same.
Seem a little angry.
That's pretty aggressive. But, you know, just like, I think a lot of people go through college and they're kind of just following the next thing. They don't actually care a ton about their classes. Maybe there's some that they are interested in. And people get into jobs and they go out into their life never having had the feeling of working for something with real conviction and purpose of like, this, I know I want to be doing this, you know? And then it gets really hard. I mean, it already is hard, even if you've had that experience, but at least you now know what to compare to.
Yeah. And you just have, you know that it's out there.
Right.
Right.
It's possible.
It's possible. And there's something that you can really like and love to do. And you're absolutely correct from the point of view that it was not always the easiest. I didn't wake up every single day, like, ready to rock and roll. Though I will say there were the vast majority of days with optiMize. I was just like, this is amazing.
Sure.
It's like, this is the most exciting thing I've ever gotten to do. But yeah, I just think knowing that there's possibilities out there to really pursue something. And so even now, starting my career, I am constantly thinking about, you know, what am I doing that I love in this role? What could I have more of?
Yeah.
What feels good? What doesn't feel good? And just not allowing myself, even in what role I am now, say, what am I dreaming of? Like, what is the life I want to create for myself? And so much of that is informed by optiMize, because I loved my work here so much and it felt so aligned with who I was and the way that I just function in a work environment. And so, no, it just feels like there's something to chase. And in a place like Michigan, where even though it's so big, it can feel so monotonous within some of your social circles, right? Like, I'm supposed to want the consulting job. I'm supposed to, need to go to grad school. I'm supposed to. And optiMize just gave me the chance to say, no, I actually want to do this. Like, this is something I'm so excited about. And there's someone out there who's going to be a great consultant, and they're going to love it. And it's not going to be me.
Yeah.
And I think having the confidence to just be able to say, that's actually not what's right for me, has been so valuable early on in my career, because it feels sometimes like you can't say no, that you should say yes to every single opportunity, that you should care about all the things. And it's just not possible.
Yeah. You have to focus. I mean, it just is. I mean, it should be a non-controversial statement. Though.
Yeah.
You just can't say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Right? You can't know everything about everything. But
I have tried.
There is that sense out there, you
Yeah.
know, of like, you need to have all the opinions on everything, and you need to be like, doing all the right, quote unquote, right things, whatever that is. And I think that, like, to be for me, and I think, it's my experience is a little different than yours or another student leader's, but to be in a place where you feel like, okay, we're working towards something I believe in.
Yeah.
And helping other people do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Addressing the kinds of issues that we think are really critical and important. Because like, it's great to want to be a consultant, but like, there's also climate change. There's things that we should be working on.
Yeah.
And so to be a part of a place where it's like, we are working on these things, like, is empowering. But then also to see like the university itself saying, and what you're doing is actually changing education and changing the university. So it's not just like a better experience for you right now, but it's building an example that can change things here too. And like, that's what I've started to see, sort of like I was saying with my role as an administrator, is more about opening an opportunity for students to then say, hey, we've got ideas for how things can happen, and let's try them out and see. Because it's very difficult to actually create change at a university, because there's just, faculty's lives they've got so many pressures on them in different ways, and no one has time, and things are, just very difficult to change. But if you can open up a window and say, like, well, what if we just ask the students to help create this thing? Yeah. It can happen. And to know that the university is valuing you in that way too, I think is another thing. Because I think a lot of times people feel sort of anonymous to the institution, but to know, like, well, I'm working to change the institution, it's allowing me to do that is interesting.
No, and I think that's so correct. But even beyond that, even if the University of Michigan did not decide that optiMize was a valuable program and really cared about it, at least for me, the joy of the community and of actually getting to try to build this thing and work towards a future that we just thought was better and brighter is so worthwhile, regardless of outcome. Yeah. And I think that also ties back to the feeling I'm constantly chasing, which is I don't care what my job title is in 20 years. What I care is that I've really liked the 20 years of my career that I've been pursuing. Yeah. And that and I think so much of that is tied to community, which is why optiMize was such a profound experience and something I love so much. And it's what I'm searching for everywhere, which is just like, who are the people around you that are going to make this process so joyful and so worthwhile, whether or not the world decides that this is valuable, because you never know.
That's right.
Right? 10 years ago, you started optiMize because you really thought that it was important that students had a place on campus where they could dream a little bigger and actually figure out how to execute that vision. And even if the university hadn't decided that they really, really cared and wanted to put resources behind it and help institutionalize it, I don't know. I can't help but believe that it would have still been a really important, impactful program. because it would have changed the people that were constructing it and the people that participated in it. And I think for me, being in optiMize and now moving outside of it and being less, I want the organization to succeed, to be really clear, but being less tied to the outcome. Even for me, just passing through it, it completely changed my life for the better. And that just feels really special and important, totally outside of any sort of other opinions about the value of the work.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that.
No, I'll sing optiMize's praises till the end of days.
There's something there around like the effort to do something that you believe is worthwhile, is worthwhile, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've got to wrap it up because I have to get to a dinner after this.
I do too.
But that was, that was a
what time
really
it is.
great way to end.
Yeah.
We're just going to clip that and just, send that out to other people.
Perfect. Yeah. Raise a shit ton of money, please. The students love it.
Yeah. Good luck, Alec, on clipping this episode. 'Cause
I don't envy your job. I hope you're getting paid overtime.
He's going to have to figure out how to start the episode because we just, all of a sudden, we're in it. But we'll go with a little bit cleaner route on the outro and wrap it up here. But really great to see you.
It was so good to see you too.
Thanks for making the time.
No, of course. This was a fun way to catch up.
Yeah.
With mics in front of our faces.
I know, it's cool.
I have no idea what I said. I'm so tired.